Welcome to the 9th Annual San Pedro International Film Festival virtual edition. And I am here to I'm the festival director. My name is Ziggy Murkic, and I'm here to remind you that the festival goes on until Thursday, midnight. So you're still able to watch all the films online. Just go to our website, spiffest.org, and take a look at all our programming there. You can also download a digital version of our program book. And today's panel is the last panel of the festival. We will have a few more filmmaker Q&As on Thursday. And with that, I'd like to introduce Tiffany Judah.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We have some really great panelists here today. And we will take questions at the end of the webinar. Just post them and we'll have the administrator signal me as far as any questions that you guys have. Our panel's really great. We're all friends, so that's good. So we can all chat it up together. I'm Tiffany Judah at Entertainment Law Partners. I'm an entertainment lawyer. I practice in production legal, financing, business affairs, and anything intellectual property related. And what I'll do is I'll have each person on the panel quickly introduce themselves and what they do, and we'll get into the nitty-gritty of it. So let's start with Steve.
Hi, my name is Steve Hayes. I'm the founder and managing member of 120DB Films, and I've recently started division of that, which is 120DB Advisors, which is a consultancy. But our core business, and one we've been engaged with for the last 17 years, is as senior secured lender to the independent film industry. So nominally, we're friendly competitors with the commercial banks that provide production loans against pre-sales tax credits, et cetera, and GAAP. And we are kind of the friendlier version. So we're a little more flexible, certainly a lot faster, kind of the FedEx of film finance. And we're looking forward to answering your questions and hopefully addressing some relevant themes.
Great, Steve, thanks. And up next is Adrian.
Thanks, Tiffany. Hi, I'm Adrian Ward. I'm Senior Director, Market Executive at Banc of California. And we're a bank that does production financing for film and TV projects, as well as traditional lending and deposit services across the entertainment industry. And looking forward to this panel.
Cool, thanks, Adrian. And Clay, you're up.
Hi, thanks for having me, Tiffany. Happy to be here. My name's Clay Epstein, president and owner of Film Mode Entertainment. We're a worldwide sales agency representing distribution rights for independent feature films worldwide. And with that, we're also an executive producer. About half of the slate that we represent to the marketplace, we executive produce, meaning we partake very early on creatively through financing as well and helping put the packages together.
Thanks, Clay. And last was Erica.
Hi, Tiffany. Thanks for having me. I'm Erica Fishkin. I'm head of business and legal affairs at Media Guarantors Insurance Solutions, and we are a film bond company. I like to think of us as the middlemen between financiers and producers to get films and television projects delivered on time and on budget, hopefully.
Right. Yes, that's a hopefully, yes. So I think what we should start out with this panel, just so that we can get everybody kind of lined up as far as understanding wise, we'll just start with some basics on what really a project needs to even get to a point where it is eligible to even be financed. And I think we'll just have some discussions on what each of you are looking for in your own departments and how you can help in the process in general. And then we can get into some specificity on, I know some of our panelists are worried about items such as what's COVID doing to us, what are tax incentives looking like these days, where is it best that I can try to get the best use of the money that I am actually able to raise. So with all of that, I'm going to start with Adrian.
Yeah, thanks, Tiffany. Our sort of decision-making process is pretty straightforward. We're not looking for anybody that comes through the door with a really sophisticated sort of package. If you do, that's great. But really, what it boils down to for most banks is the collateral. And today, that really is based in, two different areas. One are the distribution rights and the pre-sales of those rights, and the other is the tax incentive. We were doing some gap financing probably about 18 months ago. We made the decision to put that on hold. But so ultimately now we're financing pre-sale rights and tax credits. I think outside of that, I think the key component for what we're looking for is really finding a commercial product. Obviously, the pre-sales are the evidence of that, and that inherently also means that there's generally going to be a sales agent on board. So something that Clay would be doing. You've got a package that is worthy enough for a sales agent to take on and go out to the marketplace with, make those pre-sales, and then we're going to evaluate those individual distributors based on their prior track record and the different territories they're in, or maybe it's a Netflix deal for worldwide, and it's a pretty straightforward transaction. Obviously, inherent in the sales agent taking on a film, they're looking at the various commercial elements of the project, including the cast and director and script and all of that. Thankfully, as a bank, we're not reading scripts and making our decisions based on that. We do read them, by the way, but we're not the gatekeepers for that side of the process. We really are going to have conversations with the sales company about where they would pre-sale and ultimately where they do pre-sale those rights, and then everything else is really, I would say, sort of secondary, but just as important in its own way. Whether it's having a good lawyer representing the production, it's having a plan, certainly these days, that includes mitigating the risk associated with COVID, a shoot, and all that sort of stuff. So I think there's the formal stuff on one side, and then the informal stuff is really more about sitting down with the producer and just seeing that they're thinking about all the things that have to happen, and they've got a plan for that to happen. So that we're not sort of having to handhold them too much through the process. But obviously we understand that, the producers have different, levels of experience and capability, and we're more than happy to step in and do things or refer, service providers if that's needed. But it all boils down to the collateral and us being able to have those, lend against that collateral, in a way that makes the bank comfortable that it's done in the right way.
And Steve, how do you add on to what Adrian had just put in there?
Look, I mean, we're the non-bank bank, so our underwriting and our approach and how we see the world is essentially identical to that of Adrian's, in my view. We certainly do gap, and we've continued to do gap, although obviously everything's been put on pause, starting back in February. But we are starting to see some increased activity. But in terms of how we see the projects and the criteria for moving ahead with a package and hopefully helping to get them financed, it's essentially the same. I mean, we certainly need a completion bond, and we certainly need insurance that has COVID-related coverage. In the absence of that, we have from time to time been willing to consider a high net worth individual or entity that would essentially play the role of a bond. So as opposed to having an official bond in place or having an insurance policy that explicitly covered COVID, we've been willing to consider and have actually proceeded on a couple projects where that risk has been removed by the presence of these high net worth individuals who, for whatever reason, are comfortable taking that exposure, because we certainly are not. And I'll just add in that we've been involved with a working group that Akin Gump and a consortium of producers and production companies throughout the country have been lobbying Congress to try to come up with some form of an insurance backstop to allow us to kickstart, the independent production industry, because obviously most people see the world the way we do, in the absence of insurance that explicitly covers COVID and bonds that, it's kind of a non-starter to get the industry back on its feet. But otherwise, we have the same approach, and we do offer some other products, I think, that I'm not sure if Adrian and some of the other commercial banks do offer. We have done a fair bit of finishing funds for projects that are kind of the late stage. They've got bills to pay, and maybe they've got additional FX or sound or delivery items. And for those, we don't necessarily require a completion bond, although we still want to have the same sort of protection to make sure that it is going to get finished with the available funds. We've done some P&A. We've done some bridge financing. We don't bridge equity promises or money coming out of China that's promised but is yet to surface, but we certainly are willing to bridge a third-party bank closing or something that we would otherwise do as lender. And so we have a little more expensive product arrangement, array of products. We also offer a line of credits, which I'm sure Adrian does, against portfolios of good collateral, such as Netflix or Amazon contracts or other receivables that a production company might hold on their books and want to monetize. That kind of covers it.
Okay. When you refer to the different financings, I know that there's obviously different levels, and you quickly mentioned P&A versus some of the other things that you do. Just so that we are clear here on the call, that the P&A would come in at what stage versus what would you recommend a new filmmaker do before at each stage of financing?
Right. Well, obviously, P&As, those are conversations that we almost exclusively have at the end cycle. So, they're starting to move towards their distribution strategy. And for whatever reason, maybe they've decided that they're going to fund internally, or they're going to raise their own, or the producer will raise their own pool of capital to fund P&A. So there's been instances where we've considered that. Again, we're highly risk averse. So, if there's a campaign of X dollars to fund their theatrical release, which of course has quickly become a dinosaur, but in any event, it used to exist. We'll maybe take a third, to the extent we think it's commercial and we're comfortable with the players and distributors and their strategy. Maybe we'll take a third of the P&A campaign, of course, coming out first, with the balance coming from equity. And of course, we would require other collateral, so unsold territories, for example, or any other collateral that the producers can post.
Got it. And then moving into something else that we've mentioned, which is the bond. Both Adrian and Steve have mentioned that that's a critical category that they would need as far as elements to greenlight some potential financing. So, Erica, can you tell us? I know you guys are in one of the most unique positions here, and one of the most affected in this COVID era, is what I call it. So, what is a bond, and what have you guys been doing lately, and what do you think the trend is now that this announcement with the vaccine has come out? Is that something that you could try to maybe feel more comfortable with that announcement, and how's that all working over there?
All right, well, let's start with what is a bond. The financiers, before they're willing to lend any money, they want to make sure that the project is sound financially. There's a budget, there's a production schedule, there's a script, and there's a plan in place, and there are the production personnel that can meet the plan in order to actually make and complete a project. So we have our production team, which vets all of those production elements, and then I get to handle all the legal side of contracting between the financiers, where we're guaranteeing to the financier that, yes, we will have a completed and delivered project that you can use as your collateral so the sales agent can go out and take the movie and deliver it and sell it to the rest of the world. And then we also enter into a contract with the producers. The producers, you are on the hook to follow through with this plan to produce the film according to budget and according to schedule. And we are going to hold you to it. And if you don't, then we are able to come in and take over aspects of production of the film to make sure that that happens, although that's never what we want to do. That's very rare. So that's a little bit about what a bond is. In the COVID era, it's just really interesting times because, as Adrian and Steve have mentioned, it's hard to get a bond that includes COVID coverage. So both the bond companies relying on insurance to cover the COVID risk, and insurance companies are not covering COVID risk at this time unless you happen to have purchased your insurance coverage earlier in the year before the pandemic happened. So that leaves a hole that has to be covered somehow. And we've seen some creative solutions. As Steve mentioned, their productions have gone forward without a bond or with a high net worth individual covering the COVID risk. We've seen instances where we've come in and we've bonded a number of films during this time where there's an extra COVID contingency or a pot of money set aside to cover a civil authority, any shutdown of production due to COVID. And basically, money is the solution. There needs to be a pot of money, several pots of money to cover any delays or shutdowns due to COVID. As far as the announcement about vaccines, it's promising. That's fantastic news. Until there's widespread vaccines available to everyone, I think we're still going to be seeing.
You're such a bitch, an idiot.
I think that we're going to be seeing some COVID tests still required, and still the same protocols that you would normally, or you're seeing right now, anyways, in terms of having a budget line item to cover somebody overseeing the sets, with making sure that cast and crew are testing every week or every couple of days for COVID, and just to keep those protocols all will still remain in place, I think, through next year. We'll see.
Would you say that you have been affected, or you've seen productions affected so far in having to shut down, or have we been pretty lucky in getting some of these productions off and being very safe with all the other protocols in place on set?
I think it's been fairly mixed. It just depends on what stage. Early on during the COVID shutdown, there were a number of productions that had to shut down in the middle, and then I know of one that started up again just a week ago, and then they had to be shut down again. So it just depends on the timing. But we've had a number of successful projects where production has started during this COVID time, and the sets have been free of COVID, or perhaps there were positive COVID tests for a crew member, but they were quickly able to be quarantined, and the situation was able to be dealt with, and production could continue as planned, or maybe you lose a day or two here or there. But there's definitely been a lot of success in terms of seeing projects through to completion of photography during this time, or more than maybe you would expect.
And have you seen more on the ramp up, getting back into production? Are you seeing more right now of just things in pre-production planning stages right now?
I think that there's a lot of optimism out there that shows are going to, and films are going to be able to get going, but it's a question of when. We're seeing a lot of pre-production for January, February, March. Again, the vaccines may be a good thing to speed that up, but there's a lot of planning happening. It's just a matter of when it's all going to be able to move forward at a pace that we're more used to seeing, and I don't know how quickly that's going to happen.
Right. Do you feel there's going to be a huge flow of them once it opens up, and you're going to be crazier busy than ever, or?
I hope so.
Right.
No. It's definitely, I think there's a lot of creative people out here in this business that want to get their movies and their shows made, and I think that that's going to still continue. We're going to be seeing that always.
And what would you say when somebody's planning the budget to add those COVID numbers, that COVID percentage in? What are you seeing as far as a percentage of what they would need to allocate for if they want to go in during this time?
Well, I would say starting with a normal contingency amount, which is the amount that the bond company would require or any financier would require to, under normal circumstances, would be around, let's say, 8 to 10% of the budget. So we would like to see a COVID contingency probably equal to the the regular contingency to cover any shutdowns or
So an additional
cost of testing.
8 to 10%.
Yeah, and you know, everything's a little bit more expensive these days. The insurance is more expensive, higher percentage, a few percentage points higher than what it has been. And also, you need to allocate a COVID protocol portion of your budget and a dollar amount for tests for somebody to oversee your set. The guilds are requiring someone to be on set, making sure that the protocols set by the guilds are followed, not just the protocols set by the completion guarantor financier. So it does all add up.
Yeah.
More money than.
Right. Well, you said throw money at it, right?
Yeah. It does help.
Yes. So Clay, tell us, I know you and I last week or 2 weeks ago had this great conversation about, you know, what a film is worth versus what you can sell it for. And I really enjoyed that conversation. You were quite entertaining. And so I'm going to make you tell the story again here on the webinar. But I know that you're at AFM. And so, you know, maybe talk about how sales are going even during this time where you guys are doing this virtually, and how sales are going compared to what it looked like beforehand, and what you really see a value of a film is, and how you can help put the pieces together. Oh, somebody unmute Clay. Kayla.
Oh. There we go. Is that better? Okay.
Yes, there you
thanks. Everyone was muted after that incident, I suppose. So Tiffany asked me the question again. I was so preoccupied by being muted.
Okay, so, you know, obviously you're over there at AFM and
Yes.
you're doing sales virtually.
Yes.
And how is that going virtually versus when we are actually there in person doing sales?
Sure.
How is the numbers doing, and how does that reflect the value of a film, and what you see the numbers are, and how you can help put the pieces
Sure.
together on your
There's a lot of moving pieces, I think, and in some ways it's advantageous to do a virtual meeting. It's quicker, it's less expensive, it's very efficient. In other ways, we're a relationship face-to-face industry. It's always been that way for a reason. It attracts a particular type of person and personality and individual. We're not selling mattresses. We're not selling curtain rods. We're not selling, commercial time on a television station. We're selling films, emotions, stories, friendships, relationships. Nothing is going to replace an in-person market or meeting or lunch ever. I truly believe that. And I don't know anyone in this business that would not rather be in Santa Monica or in Cannes. No matter what people complain about, or complaining about costs and travel, and I'm tired and I'm jet lagged and it's so expensive, we'd all rather be overpaying for a drink at the Ivy right now. So having said that, I think we are all in the business a little relieved that we are able to do business and conduct business virtually at a level that is keeping us going, right? And it is true that we have to spend less to do that. So if the prices have gone down, or it's a little bit more difficult, or there's money that has to be spent on COVID tests, which is, we can get to that in a point. It's very challenging because there's never enough money anyways. The cost of doing business for a sales agent is astronomical. So, is business down a little bit? Yes, we haven't had to go to Cannes. Would we have done more business if we had been in Cannes? I think so. So I think the important takeaway is that we are doing business. Our distributors that are in the transactional space, as opposed to theatrically driven, are doing fine. Certainly those that are in TVOD and selling to television seem to be doing fine. Those of us that are in the more transactionally driven, and I mean that as opposed to a film that needed 3,000 screens. We're talking about films that can go on TVOD, iTunes, can be sold to an SVOD or a TV network. We're all doing okay in that space, but it all comes down to having to make that film for the right amount of money, and not having spend $1 more than is absolutely necessary for what the market will support.
And speaking of the market, what projects are you seeing as attractive to you where you would be interested in taking it on as a sales agent, and how do you contribute to then getting the financing put together?
Sure. Well, over the last, I would say more than a few years, every year that I've been in the business, which is 20 and counting, it's become increasingly more selective. So the distributors and the consumer has become increasingly more selective on what they will spend, not just their money, but their time watching, right? There's so much choice. There's other things that they can do digitally in terms of video games and short form YouTube videos and TikTok and free content, etc. It's natural and understanding that the consumer has become more selective, therefore the distributor has become more selective. Well, what does that do with us? We have to become more selective. What does that do to the producer? They can probably have to think twice about that personal story about going home for a funeral to their hometown, about a drama and reuniting with the love, and no one is known in the film, and it's shot in black and white, and it's 60 minutes. That content has no opportunity in the marketplace today because of the selectiveness of the consumer, right? And so what will trigger us to greenlight a project is having that confidence that there's a market for it. So we call ourselves market driven. That doesn't necessarily restrict us to genre. And as an example, we have a film called Stage Mother with Jackie Weaver and Lucy Liu and Adrian Grenier about a woman inheriting a drag club, right? That's, in my mind, and our prediction was correct, it's commercial. There's an obvious consumer, it's a quick pitch, it lends itself to an audience and great marketing, and can play in every country that doesn't have censorship for gay or LGBTQ content. I also have a Bruce Willis sci-fi action film. That's commercial. And you find yourself in that, no one can see my hands, you find yourself in that spectrum of commerciality, and it's more about, is there an audience for it versus what's the genre? Now, there are genres that are tougher. Drama, intrinsically, is very difficult in the independent space. And if you look at dramas that have been successful, you'll notice that 99% of the time have a huge A+ cast, and in many instances have an A+ director, and they're theatrical. It's very hard to have a drama in the transactional space. We're much more driven by very commercial, great poster, great trailer, good known cast, very easy to position. If you look at any platform on your digital space, whether it's iTunes or your cable operator that has films for rent, or even Netflix where it's all you can eat buffet that you pay for once, everything is broken down by genre, isn't it? Or by some sort of label, right? So if you can't say, if as a filmmaker, if you're thinking about your script or how to position your film, if you can't think easily where it would fit on a digital platform, then you are realizing it's going to be a little challenging. But if it can easily be positioned, this is an action, this is sci-fi, this is rom-com, this is comedy, this is horror, then you have a little bit easier chance. Distributors like films that are packaged with a very nice marketing angle. So that's what we look for. And then, of course, cast. Everyone knows the cast is the be-all and end-all in our transactional independent space. We don't have millions of dollars to spend on marketing. A studio, and you see this, Star Wars, for instance, will have unknown actors in that first film, or a Marvel film, they may have an unknown actor, relatively unknown, be the lead, because they're going to spend $100 million plus to educate a consumer who that is and where they can go see the movie. And in our space, we have $2.50 to educate an audience where to go see a movie. And the only way to compensate for that lack of marketing dollars is a known actor. Alec Baldwin. Well, I've never heard of the movie, but I've heard of Alec Baldwin. Okay, I may pay $3.99 to rent that because I've heard of Alec Baldwin. Or another way might be a derivative content, a sequel to a film they've known, or an adaptation to a book that was very widely known. So we're always looking for intrinsic value to content, intrinsic value that compensates for lack of marketing dollars.
And once you decide on a film that you want to represent, how do you figure out what it's worth, or how much money that you can get Adrian or Steve to lend against? I mean,
Sure.
how do you do that?
That is, it's a moving target. Part of it is, it's all with experience, but in terms of how we evaluate it, it's interesting. A distributor, and I'll answer it with a statement. A distributor evaluates value in a much more analytical Excel spreadsheet called a P&L, profit and loss, right? And they look at data that they have, or data that they can go look up on whatever Nielsen is called now, and actually use data that they've compiled to figure out what they're going to pay for a film. A sales agent, we use some data, we use experience, we use conversations, we use past films we've sold, we'll call a few colleagues. It's a little bit more loosey-goosey, but we're usually 9 times out of 10 pretty accurate. What's a slippery slope is to over-evaluate a film in order for it to get financed. And it's not uncommon that an individual may say, oh, but isn't it worth more, Clay? Don't you want it to be worth more, Clay? And we've really prided ourselves from the beginning, and myself as a professional, but even when I started Film Mode, to be transparent. And if I will lose a project because I'm giving them an accurate, transparent evaluation of the value, and that if that loses the project for us, I'm okay with that. I have to live with that, because I'll certainly tell a filmmaker my evaluation of it is not related or connected in any way to my belief in your material or my belief in you as a filmmaker. It's not. It's a constant. It's a fact. It's not an opinion, right? Our value is not an opinion on your material. So, but yeah, I mean, that's a long answer to a short question, but it's probably a combination of data that we use, our instinct, and if we don't know at a certain point, we'll certainly reach out and contact someone that can give us some intel. And it's usually a range. It's always a range. We have in our mind pretty much what it's going to be, but it's usually a range.
Right. And with that range, then going back to you, Steve, what happens when you have that range, but there's still some money that the producer needs? What suggestions do you make as far as deficit financing gap, and how does that work? Did we lose Steve?
He's on mute.
Oh, okay. Adrian, why don't you take this one? You're next.
Sure.
I always call it my bakers.
Well, I think, and Clay touches on it. The range is actually what you're using to go to another financier and say, look, there's priority sort of collateral that the senior debt provider, i.e. the bank, is going to use to lend against for a certain portion of the budget. But there's additional value in those unsold rights that Clay's looking at and has evaluated. And, and then you're going to a mezzanine provider or an equity investor and say, look, we need this additional money. And assuming, avenues like, product placement and things like that are probably unlikely, certainly for a number of independent movies. But it's really going out and finding an investor who's willing to take the risk, given that they're going to recoup behind, the bank in terms of getting their money back, that there's value down the road in the film, or been sort of in second cycle, if that really, that still exists, that they can look to be repaid. So it's often a combination of those things, the dreaded D word as well, in terms of producer deferrals, another way to sort of accelerate the achieving of that 100%, financing. But if it's just looking at pure financing, then it's often, you're taking more risk the further down the waterfall you are in recoupment. And so you've got to put value on the table in terms of how they're going to get their money back.
And along those same lines, obviously reducing the bottom line will help you get to being able to get to the start line at the same time. And there's other things that I've seen and that we've all seen to head, first the project's going to get produced in Louisiana, and then it's now Ontario, and then it's in Thailand. So what is the panel seeing so far? Is like other territories seem to be more beneficial for financing and treatment of the producers. I know there was recently, Australia had some backstop opportunities to cover some of the COVID risk if you went to Australia, but then of course you have to deal with extra expense of travel and quarantine and all of those other protocols. So what, Erica, Clay, everybody on the panel, what are you guys seeing, and what creative things have you been able to kind of come across your desk that you may be able to offer something that we've seen so far?
Well, I think that it's in this day and age, most independent films have some sort of tax credit financing. And now you're dealing with the question of, where can you maximize the return on shooting your film there against what does the COVID situation look like? So it makes it a little bit more complicated in that way. Normally Louisiana, Atlanta, we're seeing Ohio, New Mexico, still these states that are traditionally have offered tax incentives still are doing so, but the producers have to weigh that with, is it safe to shoot with COVID, or do I have to spend more money to maybe have all of the actors stay in the same hotel and all of the crew stay in the same hotel and cover every meal? So it's really a balancing act, but you definitely need some form of tax credits, I feel like, to help you put together the financing for many films.
Clay? Oh, I think Clay is on mute again. Oop. There he is. Okay. Oh.
Back on mute, Clay.
I think they're doing that to us. It's not intentional.
Oh.
There's Clay. Oh, no. Okay. Steve, do you have any thoughts on that?
Okay, that works. That works.
Yeah, there you are,
Go ahead, Clay. You're on.
Okay, sorry. We finally got our first production going last week. Our first production during the pandemic, that is. Mm-hmm. And I, not to get too touchy-feely, but I think that it's all of our responsibility to contribute to find a way to get films into production. And unfortunately, that equates to some sort of financial absorption by everybody, including the talent. And the talent to partake in, I don't want this to sound like I'm asking talent to take less money, even though that would be great. But I think it's everyone's responsibility, because it's frequently the first person that's always asked to defer or to shave fees is the producer. And understandably so, they're the boss, they're putting it together, they're the ones hiring everyone. But I think in this unprecedented situation, it's really all of our responsibility to keep the industry moving forward and getting films produced and finding a way to keep production going. And we can't do that if everyone is just looking at a producer or just looking at a sales agent or just looking at a bank to solve it. I think it's everyone's responsibility. And with that comes, how can we go through a budget and shave a little here and a little here and a little here and a little here and a little here until we've raised that 8 to 10%. And it hasn't affected the production value, because the biggest fear, especially in a small film, is when it's 8 to 10% of the budget. In my world, that is massive amount of money. That's the difference between, a real actor in a film or an okay actor in a film no one's excited about, or the difference between extra shoot days, or the difference between VFX shots, real production value. And you don't want it affecting production value, because then we can all go into production, but it'll be one person in a room. And every film will be one person in a room, because no one wanted to participate and contribute to the situation. So my feeling about it is everyone's responsibility, and it needs to be open. The agencies, the guilds, the sales agents, distributors all need to realize that we're all willing to give up $1 or $2, whatever it might be, collectively. we can pay for that 8 to 10%, and it doesn't affect the production value.
Yeah,
Right.
Just to be,
Go ahead.
sorry, Adrian, go ahead.
Steve.
well, yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, Clay's right, and there are some prevailing sort of trends that are helping that out, in that you've got, historically low interest rates. You've got, in a lot of locations like Canada and Australia, New Zealand, you've got very favorable foreign exchange rates in place. I think there's certainly, as COVID hopefully goes away, there's going to be a rush to get things into production, and so I think there's better times ahead, and hopefully that that optimism also helps. I do think, though, that ultimately one of the biggest issues we've been dealing with in the industry, certainly leading up to sort of COVID, was the overpricing of a lot of the talent, which primarily comes as a result of the arms race between the streamers and the fact that they've been throwing a ton of money at actors and directors and other showrunners and things like that. And the independents obviously don't have the luxury of being able to do it, but like Clay says, hopefully the producers are able to navigate through that and get better bang for their buck when it comes to putting the budgets together.
Yeah, just one point to echo what Adrian's saying, but also to go a bit beyond. And just to be totally clear, the additional 8 to 10% that we're talking about to provide for, I guess, the equivalent of PPE and best practices and protocol, all the things you need to do to keep a set safe. In our mind, I mean, that's great if you can get an equity financier or a debt financier that doesn't care about true COVID exposure and the risk of getting shut down. Because 8 to 10%, if you shut down for a month and you can't restart and the actor's gone somewhere else, I mean, you're looking at a project that could be a zero. And so as we introduced on this call, in the absence of insurance that has COVID inclusion, or somehow having that woven into a bond, or having the high net worth that we've discussed, these projects, at least from a financial perspective as a senior lender, we can't touch it. And I know there are a couple of financiers out there, senior lenders, that are willing to take some of that risk. We certainly aren't willing to put our investors in that sort of harm's way. And so we really just need to, if we're leaning on anyone, certainly, scraping the money together to provide for that additional contingency is great. But if we're going to lean on anyone, it really has to be your friendly insurance company to get with it, and perhaps legislators to recognize thousands and thousands of people employed in this industry, billions of dollars of paychecks going out to folks. And of course, the multiplier effect at hotels and restaurants, et cetera. I mean, it's a massive, massive industry. And that's why we got state tax credits in the first place. People recognize that. So we need to come up with a way of getting the insurance companies back in the game so we can truly have financeable projects that don't require essentially 100% equity.
Where are you seeing the most support for this kind of, I know I don't want to use the coverage because there isn't there yet, but are you seeing any states at least trying either, putting up hotel deals to have the quarantines, or has anybody seen anything that is helping in that regard?
I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, neither.
We're kind of operating at the higher level. And again, that's what I've just described, is that you really need explicit COVID coverage and insurance. And unless those policies were issued, prior to the pandemic, I mean, they just don't exist. And I think that there are a couple places that are dipping their toe in. They're charging these users fees like 10%, 12% for COVID related coverage. Yes. I'm not familiar with any productions that have availed themselves of that opportunity.
Yeah, we've seen. I mean, really, the COVID response has been a reflection of the sort of overbearing sort of national response, and so places, certainly New Zealand, Canada, the UK a little bit. Although that's sort of going backwards now. There's been production going on down there. I mean, it's been difficult in the US because, there's been no national sort of plan. There's been no strategy from the federal government to really deal with it. It's just been left to the states. A small number of states have done a good job, but the majority of states I don't think have really addressed it. And so, if you're looking to produce something right now, you're probably looking to do it internationally. We've financed a small TV show in Australia, which eventually got the government sort of backup fund. But originally the idea was it wasn't going to have it, but they were in a state that had a very low infection rate. They were in a location that was very isolated, and on top of that, they had very thorough production protocols, to deal with COVID. So we got comfortable as a lender that the likelihood of that risk being significant to the bank, was minimal. And we're continuing to see those kind of situations around the world. So hopefully, maybe with the advent of a new government, certainly with the advent of a vaccine, things will change here in the US as well.
Great. So I just want to remind everybody that if you want to ask a question, please do so in the chat. We're going to get to that in just a few minutes, and then we'll wrap up here. But the last question I just kind of want to address to the entire panel is, for each one of you, like, what would be the ideal project? Like, what would you want somebody to present to you? I know it's going to be probably Bruce Willis in an action film, but if we could just talk about, how you would help put that together, what would be an ideal situation for you, and what you were looking for from an introduction to a new filmmaker or somebody with a new project. Start with Clay.
Wow, you'd think it'd be an easy question to answer.
Right.
I think it would be, and I'm without naming names, I think it would be an excellent producer. I think more, especially in the COVID era, and we find ourselves and our lenders and our partners, who's producing? They want to make sure that this is a experienced, seasoned producer that can professionally and properly manage the money, get everything in place, get through the COVID issues, and it also helps attract the cast. So I think a great, seasoned, experienced producer, trustworthy producer, a great director that can attract cast, the type of the director that cast want to work with. And then probably one of those scripts that comes along once every 10 years that is great material and a great story with great characters, but also happens to be a very entertaining genre, right? So, let's say something that's a thriller, but is much more than just a thriller. Like Knives Out would be a great example. If that was a $2 or $3, even on a $2 or $3 million version of that film, it's a great film, right? And you can do the 2 million, the 10 million, the 50 million version of that film. But because that can be positioned as a thriller mystery, but it's great characters, it's a great script, it's great performances, and that's going to work everywhere.
Great. Steve's next.
Yeah, I really don't know how much to add. I think that's really the way to look at it. You got to make sure the commercial projects and the pre-sales tell the story, and we can all sit around and pontificate and read scripts and kind of enjoy each other's compliments, but ultimately the pre-sales tell the story.
Erica?
Yeah, I think Clay pretty much said it all, but what we're looking for too is just producers, director with a track record that you could follow, of being able to make these projects happen and see them through all the way through the completion and delivery of the project.
Great. And Adrian?
I think it would be a Peter Graham narrated documentary on Burning
Man.
Yeah. Right.
But if not that, I would obviously echo what Clay said. But for me, the ideal production, the ideal scenario would be that the producer came to me with plenty of time before they're going into production, and not something where they come in on a Monday and say we're shooting on Friday. I think a lot of producers underestimate the time it takes to get all of this stuff put into place. We don't just, fill out an application and hand over the money. There's loan approval, there's loan documentation, there's usually 2 or 3 issues, in the course of going through the chain of title or whatever it might be. So something where it's pre-planned out and we have the time to do it calmly and reasonably and in a way that's going to be most efficient for the producer.
Great. Okay, so this is the Q&A part. We have 2 questions. The first one's for Erica. So I'll read it. Erica, can you avoid COVID requirements if your cast and crew are isolated like Tyler Perry's model, or shooting in a place where they're on an island, they have 1/40th of the risk of the mainland, or Thailand where COVID is virtually non-existent? Is there a value added in this? A limited crew, cast projects?
I think that it does make it easier to get the project made for certain. I think that it's not going to eliminate the requirements for some sort of COVID plan or COVID contingency. Maybe the amount will be less, but I think that for a while we'll be seeing that there's still going to be a requirement for some sort of plan to deal with COVID costs or disruptions, because what the COVID rate is one day might be very different 2 weeks from now or a month from now by the time shooting's wrapping up. So it definitely helps, and I think that it would help to get the project made to be in a place where there's a low COVID rate and there's a detailed plan in place. But you're not going to eliminate it entirely.
Right. And one note on the question too, somebody like Tyler Perry, he could potentially cover the risk himself and fund it on his own. And then that would give the bond company and the bank comfort, because there's somebody with deep pockets behind the project and be able to cover that part of it.
Exactly. That's right.
Okay, the next question is for Clay. Any sense what types of projects buyers are looking for in this COVID era and looking forward to post-COVID? What budgets are attractive right now? I had a Ron Perlman attached to a horror comedy project, but was told that wasn't enough to secure a $2.5 million budget. Is there a simple way or site rate that value talent to finance it?
Well, the first answer would be similar to pre-COVID. Everyone's still looking for commercial content with cast, so that stays the same. Action, thriller, horror isn't quite as hot as it used to be. I think part of that is, I think content that is TV friendly is driving the marketplace right now. That doesn't mean it's a TV movie necessarily, but films that can eventually sell to television and play widely on pay television or the equivalent around the world. So that usually is not graphic horror. It's usually quite mainstream, primetime, action, thriller, rom-com, broad comedy, all with cast. The Ron Perlman in a horror comedy, I would be happy to represent that, but the reason you were probably told no was because the budget was just too high. So there's always a dollar amount, and Ron Perlman in a comedy horror is probably not worth 2.5 from the world, but probably worth $1 million from the world. So if you were able to finance that for $1 million gross or $1.2 million gross minus a tax credit, that film probably could get made. But then you go back to Ron Perlman maybe wanting too much money for him to do the film. And so I don't know the details of it, but that's my initial thought. And yeah, cast the cast value versus the market is again just from our experience and asking our colleagues and just being in the marketplace and speaking with our clients just day in and day out.
Got it. And then the last question is there a place that you guys evaluate projects? And if so, where can they send these to you or contact you?
It's a dark room in the basement with no light. There's not a location that I go to do it. I've done it in my office. I've done it in my living room. if they want to, I think it's difficult to just accept unsolicited projects and say, can you evaluate this? Can you evaluate that? How about this actor? How about that actor? That's a slippery slope to go down. We've done it on a consultancy basis before. So producers that we haven't worked with or haven't been in the game for too long and they really need some advice and hand-holding, we've done that on a consultancy basis. And then if we work with them to get the project into a good place, we may then come on as the EP and sales agents or introduce them to a better fitting entity. But that'd probably be the best answer for that question.
Anybody else before we close up?
As the bond company, we would need a whole package that we would be submitted, the budget and the script and a schedule that we would look at. But typically we're not the first ones to receive the package. So.
Okay. All right, with that, I'm going to toss it to Ziggy for any closing thoughts, and we appreciate everybody attending and supporting the festival, and we hope much success to you all and that we get through this COVID much, much faster than we have been. So thank you all.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you to the panelists for participating and for all this wonderful information. If I could just direct everybody to our website again, we're online and screening films until November 12th. It is free to register, and the website is spiffest.org. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Clay.
Thanks for having